Welcome to the Israel Answers series, connecting Israel, the Bible, and you. Join Susan Michael as she explores timely issues and current events from a scriptural perspective to equip the Christian world with a balanced and biblical response. Be sure to subscribe for future episodes, which will ignite your faith and bring the Bible to life in your everyday world. Now, let's join Susan with your Israel Answers.
Welcome to the Out of Zion podcast. I'm Shelley Neese, filling in for Dr. Susan Michael. Today, I have with me Christopher Kuehl. He's the founder of Present Witness and author of Is God a Zionist? Thank you for being on the show.
Obviously, we're excited to be here.
Yeah, so tell me, first of all, what is Present Witness?
Yeah. Present Witness was just kind of at first it was just going to be like a throwaway brand. So Augustine, the church father, has this doctrine about the Jews called the witness doctrine. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And it's this pretty disparaging perspective on why the Jews continue to exist as a people. And so I decided to take that and say, no, the Jews are a present witness of the faithfulness of God. And it's like an online brand that I do a bunch of stuff under. And then it just kind of became this theological project, I guess, specifically designed to deal with a lot of the questions that are being asked online. And so, I have that. And then I do a podcast called The One New Man with a 77-year-old Jewish man who was an early synagogue founder. His Clev and Shim's father, actually, John Myers. So we kind of all do that under Present Witness and One New Man. So
that's fantastic. So, okay, I'm a church history nerd.
Okay.
So just for the audience, explain. Augustine has this reputation of being very metaphorical with the Bible. And so he compares the Jewish people to Cain and his ark of Cain. So can you just explain that? I think
well, it is interesting. So his whole thing was like he couldn't figure out, why did the Jews continue to exist? Why were they not assimilated after the destruction of the temple and the expulsion from Jerusalem? And so, the whole thing with the mark of Cain after the murder of Abel was forced to wander the earth. And that was kind of like the judgment by God, is he would, he had this, some people think he even had the like a unicorn thing that God put up. But his whole thing was to wander the earth. And so that's what Augustine applied to the Jews. Like, you are basically, your permanent judgment is that you will forever be landless, and you will be walking around the earth carrying your Torah scrolls as a representation of what happens when you disobey God. So that was basically his, and this was like an innovation, a positive innovation for where church history was at the time, if you can believe that. So that's kind of the idea behind it. And so I wanted to take that idea, and present witness just means the Jews are a present witness to the faithfulness of God.
The one caveat that I will give credit to Augustine is that he also took the Psalm, slay them not.
That's true. You're absolutely right.
And applied it to the Jewish people. So he did some good.
Totally. Which you're kind of like, it's kind of amazing that you needed to find some biblical reason to not kill the Jews, that's crazy. But you're absolutely right. He innovated, I guess.
And there are moments in church history that they know that it was because of that slay them not command that they didn't kill Jews when they had the opportunity.
So you are giving him some really some credit there.
Some lull about it.
Yeah. No, it's good.
So what is your background? Are you a theologian, biblical historian?
Yeah, so I'm wrapping up my master's in theology. I've probably read, I don't even want to think about it, thousands and thousands of books on theology of the church in Israel. I consider getting my PhD, but I'm not super interested in talking to academics. I'm very interested in the online layman, just how to translate things for people that they'll listen to it. And so I'm more interested in that. So I don't know if I'll get a PhD, but I'm almost done with my master's in theology. I would be done if it wasn't for the book.
Okay.
But I just felt like the environment was changing so rapidly. I was like, I got to write this right now, And so I stopped a lot of that just to finish this project.
And so what is your niche? What are you studying in church history that's interesting you most? You're saying that it's Israel-Christian relations.
Yeah, it's predominantly that. It's basically looking at all the major church leaders from, Justin Martyr all the way through Karl Barth. What has the church been saying about the Jews, and what is this producing, and what is this? So a lot of it is that kind of look at it. But also, it's just interesting to see where things are at denominationally, with, specifically the Catholic Church after Nostra Aetate, which was a big magisterial statement that I'm sure you're aware of that was made in the 70s that really took a major chink out of the wall of kind of the divide between the Christians and the Jews. And so it's interesting just to see where, I don't know, it's so interesting what's happening in America right now with, depending on what denomination you're in and what age bracket you're in, you're going to be interacting with the Israel conversation completely different. And so I think what's happened over the last 15 years, I think there was a lot of, or 50 years, there's been so much goodwill after the Holocaust, which there should be, obviously. And Jewish-Christian relations have come so far in that. But for whatever reason, I would have thought after October 7th that would have continued. But the reverse seemed to happen, actually, where that goodwill seems to be totally spent now. And so I think what's happening is a lot of the old theological demons are presenting a new close, and so, a lot of the questions are being asked. And I think that there are some legitimate questions that, especially Gen Z, as they're trying to figure out, like, okay, they're in a totally different environment than what we were raised in, so like it was much easier to get a home. It was easier to get married. It was easier to have there were not economic challenges. They're also the first generation that's totally online 100% of the time. And I think that world has a way of kind of warping perception. And so they're up against these specific things. And so I think it's very hard for them to process, like, why should we be sending $100 billion to Israel when I can't afford a home? Like, that's a reasonable question. That's not inherently anti-Semitic. When certain people ask, it is anti-Semitic. But there are a lot of really good people that I think are just very confused by the swirl that's happening right now. So I wanted to write something that was interacting with all the arguments, with, all the different sides of this. I basically, the book is split into 3 parts. The first few chapters are very brief history of the parting of the ways. If you're familiar with theology at all, that's kind of what they call the divide between, the church and Judaism in the 1st and 2nd centuries.
So that's your starting point.
That's the natural starting point. And I kind of choose the 4 or 5 major things on each side that I think contributed to the schism, which you would be very familiar with. And then
these were all pivots and turning points.
Yeah,
Jewish Christian.
Exactly. So, I kind of start with the Jewish response first, since it was primarily, Jesus was considered a Jewish heresy at first. And so you really see some of the initial responses from, which we read about in the Bible pretty frequently. And there's a couple other things I added. And then in the second chapter, it's the Christian response then, when the church starts to become predominantly Gentile to its, Jewish heritage and root system. So those are the first 2 chapters. And then the next 6 chapters are a biblical case for Israel. I obviously discuss things like replacement theology and fulfillment theology, which is kind of a rebranding of, replacement theology. I take on a lot of N.T. Wright's work, which is a really kind of a spiritualized land theology, which, Davies and some of these big modern theologians, have a real problem with the idea of physical land, which to me is a very Gnostic idea, which just simply means that, Christianity is not a Gnostic religion. Like, we're an embodied religion. We serve an incarnate Lord who became flesh. And so we have to be real about a God that cares with the earth that he's given us to steward. And this includes land. And so I kind of argue against what I consider like more of a Gnosticism approach to land. And then
because you're saying N.T. Wright, one of the greatest like living modern scholars, but he does have his thorn that he presents. He doesn't believe that the covenant is continuing.
He doesn't believe it's exactly right. So first of all, I actually love a lot of N.T. Wright stuff. Like, he is an amazing apologist for, his work on the resurrection is incredible. But he's probably the number 1 replacement theological modern scholar of our day, and he's massively popular. And besides thinking that the covenant is done, he also doesn't value even the idea of land among nations, and I think that's just something that's really, I think the church has really struggled with, like, how do they get behind the idea that people belong in a land? And I think that's really hard for the modern mind for some reason, and it's easy for us to say because we all have our own land. We're kind of talking about this, like, N.T. Wright's perfectly fine in Britain having his own country, saying that, well, no, the Jews don't deserve a homeland, or the Jews don't, there's nothing significant about this idea. But I think a lot of that theology comes from a Christianity that's overemphasizes the spiritual and underemphasizes the physical world. And obviously, like, the spiritual is of the most importance. But I think that we have to find a way that these two worlds are interacting and coming together. God's spiritual reality takes place on the physical world. And so to just throw out the idea that like nations and these things don't matter or they're not significant, I think is totally a misstep. So I take on some of that stuff. I take on a lot of the verses and things that are people being used. I have a chapter called The Tyranny of Ignorance where I go through, this is going to be stuff that I'm sure ICEJ has been interacting with for a while, but the Synagogue of Satan and all these just misused stuff that people...
Which we saw, referenced when the kid in Mississippi burned the synagogue. So it's like, this is not something we should turn our eyes from.
It's not archaic. I think we've been, for the last 50 years, we've been in this really cool time where we could pretty much openly talk about the Jewish people in Israel and do so not really even having to convince people that it's important. There was kind of a willingness like, God's doing something here.
Right.
And I don't know if it's because of the conflict, that people have a really hard time. I think that obviously the media spin on that's not good, but I think it's also just hard for people to see war and violence and to figure out like, how is God involved in all this, But I think that we are now back into an era where we have to be better at apologetics and being willing to hear out an argument that maybe is repulsive to us and give an honest answer in a serious way. And so that's really what this book tries to do. It's predominantly meant for people that maybe don't know where they are landing on this issue, or like, maybe they followed Tucker Carlson for 10 years and now they're confused with what he's saying about Israel. And so now they're confused about Israel. And so it's like, it's meant to really interact in an honest way with some of the things that are being said right now.
So how do you interact in an honest way? And I'm sincerely asking this because I'm asking this myself. And also not validate, right? Like, so how do you engage the argument but not validate?
I think it's really helpful to do this case by case. So when I'm interacting, if I'm mentoring like a 22-year-old who is in the Nick Fuentes algorithm and he's seeing stuff and he's like, hey, like, does the Talmud say this about me? Or does, like I am struggling financially. Why are we sending so much money? This is just a kid who's confused. Like you can give him honest answers to that and engage with the things that, and I don't have to co-sign everything Israel does. I don't have to, I can feel maybe pro or con about Bibi Netanyahu and still think Israel exists. And so I try to give them a wide ground to stand on. Like, you don't have to see it exactly like this. God is still at work, even though these things are happening, like that we might disagree with on these issues. And so I also recognize that there's really bad faith actors though. And with that, you can do this, but I think what we're in danger of is calling everything that we might disagree with, or we might find repulsive, just simply anti-Semitic.
Right.
When it could just be a 22-year-old who's super confused and doesn't know how to think about this, and they're still able to be engaged and walked out of this moment, if that makes sense. And so I want to see us do that with the people that are asking questions in good faith and are not the Candace Owens and the Tucker Carlsons who are clearly just like agenda based on what they're doing. And you're never going to, like, there's a proverb, an Indian proverb that says you can't wake a man who's pretending to be asleep. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of that, but I think there's a lot of good people that are just seeing all this and they don't know what to make of it. They haven't had our experience in Israel. They might not even know a Jewish person. Honestly, most people don't. Like, they just, they don't understand what these words are. These, 90% of the time, these Talmud quotes don't even exist. They don't understand all this stuff that's swirling around them. And so for me, I've just found it's really helpful to like, just walk them through this stuff as if they were my child and they had just fallen into something they were unsure about. And so, but I can't do that if I'm like, hey, you're an idiot and you're dumb for thinking this, and this is an unserious question and you're an anti-Semite. And so my concern is just that, like, I just don't want to see us lose this generation because we're afraid to interact in a real way, in a good faith way, with those people that are just being confused by the moment that we're in, if that makes sense.
It does. So I'm going to give you one of the questions. Okay. So I went with a group with ICJ USA. We brought a group of young people to Israel, and these are people that were predisposed. I mean, they love Jesus, they love the Bible, but they are products of this generation and what they're hearing. And so, like I was saying, some questions you don't want to validate. Like, they're asking things like, was October 7th an inside job, or did Israel kill Charlie Kirk? And so those are the questions I don't want to validate. Yeah. The main question that kept coming up, And I know that this is a soundboard too that, that they're hearing, but I do think it's one, like you said, that needs to have a response is, how is modern Israel the same as biblical Israel? Because only in their eyes, only biblical Israel should be relevant to them. But they do see a big disconnect between biblical and modern Israel. So how would you answer that?
Well, I think one of the most amazing things about Israel, so there was another theologian, probably the first well-known Christian apologetics theologian was a guy named Pascal. And he was a 16th century Catholic theologian. And he had a whole kind of defense of God, belief in God, because of the Jewish people. He would go and he said, look at the fact that the Jewish people still exist. They're still this people. Like that is one of the reasons why you should believe in God, okay? Now, you can take what he's saying there and you can elevate that, because the reality is that the Jewish people are the only people in the entire world that have ever been removed from their land, had the language die out, and then been restored to their land, and they're still worshiping the same God that they did when all of this happened. So they anthropologists and sociologists judge this by, do they worship the same God? Do they speak the same language? And do they live in the same land? By these three things, there's not a single people in the world that do it besides the Jewish people. So you're telling me that I'm supposed to believe that that's not the Lord that's doing this? Like that's an insane proposition for me. Like, just you can reason it out. And a lot of people, I think, who ask the question that you're asking me cannot understand how the modern Israel that doesn't serve Jesus could be the Israel of the Bible. But first of all, the Israel of the Bible was often being in and out of judgment with the Lord, and that's just the reality. And at no point did they ever stop being his people. And in fact, why God was so offended by this was because they were his people always. And so he was offended that they would take his name. And so I think that we also have to have a correct perception about the restoration of Israel. And I could talk a little bit about what I believe in this, and I get a lot of my theology of this in Ezekiel 36, 37, 38. But the restoration of Israel, that Ezekiel talks about, was first the physical restoration of the people. It's the bones coming back to life. It's this thing that basically looks like it's been dead. And on the physical, on the outside, it's being restored. And so I think a lot of this is the metaphor of just modern Israel being restored as an economy, as a national identity, as a people. But the last thing to happen to this army is that the Spirit of the Lord comes in. And so that's my hope, at least. This is, I think we all kind of look through this with a glass dimly to some degree, but I try to encourage people that direction. I just think that you can look at the reality of it, and an honest person cannot deny that, that God is clearly at work. And even the church fathers and many of the medieval theologians, their main argument against the Jews was, look, they've been kicked out of their land. God has judged them. So you can use their logic and say, look, the Jews are back in the land, and I think it is unfair theologically to use the church fathers that direction, but not use them the direction that, like, we can now clearly see the grace of God and the hand of God is back. Not that it ever left, it preserved the Jewish people, right, but has moved them back into the land. And so those are kind of things that I say to that question.
Oh, that's a great answer. Now I just need to put you in my pocket and take you on a tour. Well, so I do have a copy of your book. The good news for you is that I spilled coffee on my computer, and so I have nothing to read on the plane ride. So I'm going to be reading this book, and it's a great looking book, by the way. I'm a big fan of. I do judge books by the.
I do too.
And it looks wonderful.
And that was the other thing. I was like, man, so much of our messaging right now is. It's off-putting, and it's like, if you're 20 and you're looking at this, you're going to be like, what? I wanted to make it unoffensive. Like, you're not really sure what to think of it. Like, it's more, so that was kind of the idea of it.
Just one giant lion of Judah made.
Right. Like totally like a big lion roaring.
Well, tell people, where can they find it?
So the book comes out March 17th on Amazon. So what you have is a pre-release, and it's going to be on Audible, Kindle, obviously physical. And so, that March 17th, you can get it everywhere Amazon ships to.
Exactly. Exactly. We could say it's available in all bookstores, but we all know you're going to
go to Amazon. Right.
Well, thank you for so much for being on the show. And thank you for listening to Out of Zion.
Hey, just give me one more minute. I want to offer you one of our free resources. We have wonderful resources in our show notes. And if you go to our website at icejusa.org/show notes, you'll find links for a number of our free offers. We have downloadables to help root you in Scripture, help you to understand the issues surrounding Israel and the importance of Christian support for Israel. And don't forget, please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and stay connected. Thank you, and God bless.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Out of Zion with Susan Michael. Be sure to subscribe to Out of Zion now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Pray.com, Salem One Place, Salem Life Audio. Out of Zion with Susan Michael is a production of ICEJ USA. All rights reserved.